The powerful businessman opened the trunk expecting a bottle of champagne. But what he saw inside made his hands shake for the first time in his life. A young woman, bruised and trembling. 2 newborn babies wrapped in old blankets. And the words that nearly stopped his heart. "Please, don't let her find us. She'll kill them." That night, Bryce Harrington learned something every powerful man fears. Sometimes the real danger isn't your enemy. Sometimes, it's the person you love. If stories about love, sacrifice, and justice touch your heart, take a moment to subscribe. There are many more stories here where kindness wins, even after the darkest nights. Bryce Harrington was the kind of man people didn't say no to. At 37, he owned half the luxury real estate on Manhattan's Upper East Side. To the public, he was a brilliant CEO. To the powerful and the dangerous, he was something else entirely. A man who built an empire from nothing and protected it with quiet strength. But for all his power, there was one place where Bryce was completely unguarded. His heart. That Friday evening, the Harrington mansion was glowing with lights. Music floated through the windows. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Inside, New York's wealthiest guests were celebrating Bryce's engagement to Tanya Whitfield, beautiful, elegant, and born into old money. To everyone watching, it looked like the perfect union between wealth and power. Bryce stepped out onto the driveway, adjusting his suit, a rare smile on his face. "Bryce," Tanya called from the front steps. "Can you grab the champagne from the trunk? The guests are running us dry." He lifted his keys with a playful nod. "Coming, babe." For the first time in years, life felt calm. Stable. Almost peaceful. He walked toward his Rolls-Royce, the evening air cool against his face. The sound of laughter drifted from the house. In his mind, he was already picturing the future. Marriage, a family, maybe even a slower life someday. He pressed the trunk button. The lid lifted. And Bryce froze. At first, his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. Curled inside the trunk like a frightened animal was Melody, the quiet housekeeper who had worked in the mansion for 2 years. Her uniform was torn. Dirt streaked her face. One cheek was swollen purple. And clutched against her chest were 2 tiny newborn babies. They were wrapped in worn blankets. Their little faces were red from crying too long without sound. Melody looked up at him, eyes wide with terror. "Please, Mr. Harrington," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't steal anything. I didn't do anything wrong. Just, please don't let her find me." Bryce couldn't speak. This was the same woman who quietly cleaned the house before sunrise. The one who always kept her head down. The one who sent most of her paycheck home to her grandmother in Ohio. She wasn't a troublemaker. She was poor. Invisible. The kind of person wealthy people barely noticed. "Who?" Bryce finally managed. "Who are you hiding from?" Melody's grip tightened around the babies. "Miss Tanya," she whispered. "She'll kill them." Before Bryce could respond, the sound of high heels echoed behind him. Sharp, fast, angry. "Bryce, what's taking so long?" "The guests are." Tanya stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes moved quickly, the open trunk, Melody, the babies. For just a fraction of a second, something flashed across her face. Fear. Then it disappeared. Her expression changed instantly into outrage. "Oh my God!" Tanya screamed, rushing forward. "I knew it! I knew I couldn't trust her." Bryce turned, confused. "Tanya, wait. She kidnapped my relatives." Tanya shouted, pointing at Melody. "Those babies belong to my cousin. I knew something was off about this girl." Melody shook her head wildly, tears pouring down her face. "That's not true. She's lying. Mr. Harrington, please." Tanya grabbed Melody by the hair and yanked her out of the trunk. "Stop!" Bryce's voice thundered. But the damage was done. Melody fell hard onto the driveway, still protecting the babies with her body. Within minutes, police sirens cut through the night. Tanya had already called them. And as the officers stepped out, they saw exactly what Tanya wanted them to see. A wealthy, well-dressed woman crying. A poor housekeeper in dirty clothes holding 2 babies. Appearances made the decision before anyone spoke. "Ma'am, put the children down," an officer ordered. "No," Melody cried. "Please don't give them to her." But no one listened. The babies were taken from her arms. Handcuffs snapped around her wrists. As they dragged her toward the patrol car, Melody twisted back, desperation in her voice. "Mr. Bryce, there's a letter in the yellow blanket. It's from Keith." The name hit him like a shock. Keith. His younger brother. The brother who had died a year ago. Bryce looked at Tanya. For the briefest moment. Her face had gone pale. The police car drove away. The party music started again. And standing alone in the driveway, Bryce Harrington felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. As he slowly turned back toward the open trunk, the yellow blanket lay there in the dim light. And inside it, something was waiting that was about to change his life forever. Before we continue, I'd love to know, if you were Bryce in that moment, would you trust your fiancée or the frightened housekeeper? Tell me in the comments. Because what Bryce was about to read would make him question everything he thought he knew. Bryce stood beside the open trunk, the music and laughter from the mansion drifting across the driveway like it belonged to another world. Inside the trunk, the yellow blanket lay folded in the corner. For a long moment, he didn't move. Keith. His brother's name hadn't been spoken in this house for months. It was a wound Bryce carried quietly, buried under work, power, and long nights that never seemed to end. Keith had been the good one. The gentle one. The one who still believed people were mostly decent. And now a poor housekeeper had just screamed his name while being dragged away in handcuffs. Bryce reached into the trunk. The blanket was thin and worn, the kind you'd find in a discount store. Not something that belonged anywhere near his life of polished marble floors and imported silk. As he unfolded it, a white envelope slipped into his hand. The paper was creased and slightly damp. He stared at the handwriting. His breath caught. He knew that writing. The uneven slant. The way the letters leaned forward like they were always in a hurry. "Bryce," he whispered under his breath. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone." His knees felt weak, but he forced himself to keep reading. The words were simple. No business language. No legal talk. Just Keith. Honest. Straight. Afraid. Keith wrote about 2 babies. Twins. His children. Children he had kept secret because their mother was poor. A waitress he'd fallen in love with, a woman who had no money, no family name, no protection. And that made them vulnerable. Bryce's hand tightened around the letter as he read the next lines. Keith had been threatened. Told that if he tried to claim his share of the Harrington inheritance, if he acknowledged his children publicly, everything would be taken from him. Then came the part that made Bryce stop breathing. The accident wasn't an accident, the letter said. If anything happens to me, protect my babies. And Bryce, don't trust Tanya. The paper shook in his hands. For a long time, Bryce just stood there under the driveway lights, the sounds of celebration behind him, the night quiet around him. Inside the house, Tanya was probably smiling for guests, accepting congratulations, planning a wedding. Bryce folded the letter slowly and slipped it into his inner pocket, right over his heart. He didn't storm inside. He didn't confront her. Bryce Harrington didn't react with emotion. He reacted with control. He walked back toward the mansion with the same calm expression he used in million-dollar negotiations. Inside, the party was still alive. Glasses clinked. A jazz band played softly. Wealthy couples laughed about vacations and investments. Tanya spotted him immediately and walked over, her expression warm and concerned. "There you are," she said gently, touching his arm. "I'm so sorry about all that. I can't believe that girl would do something like this." Bryce looked at her. Really looked. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile practiced. Her eyes steady. If he hadn't read the letter, he would have believed her. "What happened to the babies?" he asked quietly. "They're in the kitchen with Martha," Tanya replied smoothly. "I told her someone from my cousin's family will pick them up later tonight. It's best to keep them out of sight. This whole situation is embarrassing enough." Embarrassing. That word settled heavily in Bryce's chest. "Of course," he said calmly. "You did the right thing." Tanya relaxed slightly, relieved by his reaction. "I knew you'd understand," she said softly. "That girl has always been strange. Quiet people like that, you never know what they're capable of." Bryce nodded. Then he turned and walked toward the kitchen. The noise of the party faded as he pushed the door open. Martha sat at the table, her gray hair tied back, her old hands moving carefully. The twins lay in a wicker basket lined with clean towels. One of them was crying weakly. The other sucked desperately on a bottle Martha was holding. "They were starving," Martha said quietly when she saw him. "Miss Tanya said not to feed them too much, but I couldn't watch them suffer like that." Bryce stepped closer. The crying baby opened its eyes. Blue-gray. Clear. Familiar. Keith's eyes. Something tightened painfully in Bryce's chest. He reached down slowly, offering his finger. Tiny fingers wrapped around it instantly. The grip was strong. Determined. Alive. And in that moment, something inside Bryce shifted. Power. Money. Reputation. None of it mattered. These children were his brother's blood. His family. "No one is taking them," Bryce said quietly. Martha looked up, surprised. "Sir." "No one," he repeated. "If anyone asks, tell them the babies are still unsettled. Keep them here. Feed them. Keep them safe." Martha studied his face. Then she nodded. "I understand." Bryce stepped back, already pulling out his phone. He sent a short message. To two men who didn't work for the event staff. Men who worked for him. Guard the kitchen. No one enters without my approval. Then he walked back into the party. From across the room, he saw Tanya standing near the bar, her back turned, her phone pressed close to her ear. Her voice was low, urgent. Bryce moved quietly behind a marble column, just close enough to hear. "I don't care how you do it," Tanya whispered sharply. "The kids are in the kitchen with an old cook. Go through the service entrance. Take them and disappear. I'll double the payment." Bryce's grip tightened around his glass. "The maid is already taken care of," she continued coldly. "And if anyone asks, those babies never existed." There was a pause. Then she added one more sentence. "No mistakes this time, Benny." The name hit Bryce instantly. Benny the Rat. A man who specialized in problems that needed to disappear. Bryce closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them again, the warmth was gone. Only something colder remained. Across the room, Tanya ended the call and turned back toward the guests, her smile returning as if nothing had happened. And Bryce realized something chilling. The woman he had almost married wasn't just lying. She was planning to erase two innocent lives. And somewhere out there, a man named Benny was already on his way. Bryce didn't move right away. Across the room, Tanya was laughing with a group of guests, her hand resting lightly on a champagne glass, her posture relaxed, elegant, perfect. Anyone watching her would see a successful woman hosting the night of her life. But Bryce had just heard the truth behind that smile. And the truth was colder than anything he had faced in the streets, in boardrooms, or in the shadows where power was traded. He turned slowly and walked toward the hallway that led to the service entrance. His phone was already in his hand. 2 words. Lock it down. The reply came almost instantly. Done. By the time Bryce reached the back corridor, the atmosphere had already changed. The kitchen door was closed. 2 men stood nearby, dressed like event security, calm and silent, but their eyes alert. They gave Bryce a small nod. No one was getting through. From inside the kitchen, he could hear the soft sounds of Martha moving, the quiet whimper of one of the babies, the gentle rhythm of someone humming under their breath. It was strange. In the middle of a house filled with money, ambition, and deception, the only place that felt real was a small kitchen where a tired old woman was feeding 2 children who had no idea how close they were to disappearing. Bryce stepped inside. Martha looked up. "They're settling down," she said softly. "Poor things were so hungry. Babies shouldn't cry like that." Bryce walked over and looked down. One of the twins had fallen asleep, tiny chest rising and falling slowly. The other blinked up at him, eyes searching, uncertain. He rested his hand gently on the edge of the basket. "You're safe," he murmured, more to himself than to them. For a moment, he thought about Keith. His younger brother laughing at something stupid. The way Keith always believed love mattered more than money. The way Bryce used to think that made him weak. Now Keith was gone. And his children were almost erased because they didn't fit into someone's version of a perfect future. Bryce straightened. "No one comes near them," he said quietly. Martha nodded. "I won't let anyone." Bryce stepped back into the hallway. And that was when the side door opened. A thin man slipped inside, moving fast but trying to look casual. His cheap suit didn't match the elegance of the house. His eyes darted left and right. Even without the scar near his cheek, Bryce would have known him. "Benny." The man paused when he saw the 2 guards. He tried to smile. "Delivery entrance?" One of the guards stepped forward. "Party's closed in the back," he said evenly. Benny's eyes flicked toward the kitchen door. Then past the guard. Then toward Bryce. Recognition hit his face like a slap. For a split second, panic showed. Then instinct took over. He turned to leave. "Stop him," Bryce said quietly. The guards moved before Benny could reach the door. Within seconds, his arms were pinned behind his back. "Easy, easy," Benny muttered quickly. "I was just leaving." Bryce walked toward him slowly. Up close, Benny smelled like cheap cologne and fear. "Who sent you?" Bryce asked. Benny swallowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Bryce didn't raise his voice. Didn't threaten. He just held the man's gaze. "Think carefully," he said. "Because the wrong answer tonight won't just cost you money." Benny's eyes flicked around the hallway. Then he leaned forward slightly. "She said the kids were a problem," he whispered. "Said they needed to disappear. That's all I know." Bryce didn't react. "Who is she?" he asked. Benny hesitated. Then, quietly, "Miss Tanya." The hallway went very still. Even the sounds from the party seemed distant. Bryce nodded once. "Take him to the police," he told the guards. "Trespassing. Attempted child endangerment. Make sure he talks." Benny started protesting immediately, but his voice faded as he was dragged toward the exit. Bryce stood alone for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the party. Nothing about his expression had changed. But inside, the last piece of doubt was gone. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. When he re-entered the ballroom, Tanya spotted him again. She walked over quickly, her eyes searching his face. "Everything okay?" she asked lightly. "Just a man who wandered in through the back," Bryce replied calmly. "Security handled it." Her shoulders relaxed. "Good," she said. "Tonight is too important for any more drama." Bryce studied her. There was no guilt in her eyes. No hesitation. Just calculation. He realized something then. Tanya didn't think she was doing anything wrong. To her, this was survival. Control. Protection of what she believed was hers. Bryce picked up a glass from a passing tray. "Let's enjoy the evening," he said. Tanya smiled, relieved. "Yes," she said. "Let's." But Bryce wasn't enjoying anything. He was watching. Waiting. Because the night wasn't over. And there was still one person who didn't know what was happening. In a holding cell across the city, Melody sat barefoot on a cold bench, her arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't cried for hours. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because the only thing she could think about were the babies. Whether they had been fed. Whether they were warm. Whether the wrong hands had reached them. She closed her eyes and whispered quietly, like a prayer. "Please, God, just keep them safe." At that exact moment, Bryce pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The line picked up on the first ring. "Caldwell," he said. "I need you here tonight. Bring a private investigator. And a DNA testing kit." There was a brief pause. "Is this urgent?" the lawyer asked. Bryce looked across the room at Tanya, who was laughing again, her hand resting over her heart as if she were the happiest woman in New York. "This is life and death," Bryce said. And as he ended the call, Tanya suddenly turned and looked directly at him. For a moment, their eyes met. Her smile stayed in place. But something behind it shifted, as if she was beginning to sense that the night was no longer under her control. For a few seconds, Bryce held Tanya's gaze. Her smile didn't move. Her posture stayed relaxed. To anyone else, it looked like a loving fiancé sharing a quiet moment across a crowded room. But Bryce knew her better now. That look in her eyes wasn't warmth. It was calculation. She was watching him the same way a chess player watches the board, checking for pieces that had moved without her noticing. Bryce lifted his glass slightly, as if toasting her from across the room. Her smile widened. Satisfied. She turned back to her guests. Bryce didn't drink. He set the glass down and moved toward the hallway just as the front doors opened. Attorney Caldwell entered first, gray suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour. Behind him walked a silver-haired man carrying a medical case. Neither of them looked surprised to be called to a mansion party near midnight. They had worked with Bryce long enough to understand one thing. If he said it was urgent, it was. Caldwell approached quietly. "Where?" Bryce didn't waste words. "Kitchen. No one else is to know." They moved quickly through the hallway. Inside the kitchen, Martha looked up in confusion as the doctor set his case on the table. "It's all right," Bryce told her gently. "We just need a small test." The babies stirred as the doctor worked carefully, swabbing their cheeks. Tiny sounds filled the quiet room. Soft breaths. Little movements. Life that didn't understand how close it had come to being erased. Bryce watched without speaking. Every second felt heavier. When the samples were sealed, Caldwell placed them carefully into a protective envelope. "I'll have the lab prioritize it," he said. "We'll know by morning." Bryce nodded. Morning. That suddenly felt very far away. As they stepped back into the hallway, Caldwell lowered his voice. "Bryce, what exactly is going on?" Bryce didn't answer right away. He looked back through the kitchen door, where Martha was gently rocking one of the twins, humming softly like a grandmother who had done this her whole life. Then he spoke. "If I'm right," he said quietly, "the woman I was about to marry tried to have my brother's children killed." Caldwell didn't react. After 30 years working with the Harrington family, shock was a luxury he no longer allowed himself. "I'll make sure the results are secure," he said. Bryce nodded once. Because if Tanya had already tried to buy people to change the truth, then the truth itself needed protection. Across the city, the night was very different for Melody. The holding cell was cold. Too bright. Too quiet in the wrong ways. She sat on the bench, her feet bare against the concrete floor, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. The officer at the desk had already told her twice to stop asking questions. But the silence was worse than any answer. She kept seeing the babies in her mind. Their little faces. The way they had cried without sound inside the trunk because she kept whispering to them, begging them to stay quiet, begging them to stay alive. She had climbed into that trunk because it was the only place she could think of where Tanya wouldn't look. 3 hours in darkness. 3 hours of fear. And now she didn't even know if it had been enough. A woman in the next cell watched her for a while before speaking. "You don't look like a kidnapper," she said. Melody shook her head slowly. "I'm not." "What happened then?" Melody hesitated. Then she answered honestly. "I was trying to save them." The woman leaned back against the wall. "From who?" Melody swallowed. "Someone rich." The woman gave a short, tired laugh. "Yeah," she said. "That'll do it. Money always wins." Melody lowered her eyes. That was exactly what she was afraid of. Back at the mansion, the party was starting to thin out. Guests were leaving with polite smiles and quiet whispers. Something in the atmosphere had shifted, even if they couldn't explain it. Tanya noticed it too. She moved through the room more quickly now, checking faces, watching Bryce whenever he wasn't looking. Finally, she caught him alone near the study. "Bryce," she said softly, "can we talk for a minute?" He nodded and followed her inside. She closed the door behind them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tanya stepped closer. "You've been distant tonight," she said. "Is this about what happened earlier?" Bryce met her eyes. "What do you think happened?" he asked calmly. Tanya sighed, as if exhausted. "I think that girl tried to take advantage of the party," she said. "Poor people sometimes get desperate. I almost feel sorry for her." Bryce studied her face. No hesitation. No guilt. Just confidence. "Do you?" he asked quietly. Tanya nodded. "She'll probably claim she was trying to help." "They always do." Bryce stepped a little closer. "And the babies?" he asked. "Where did they come from?" Tanya didn't blink. "My cousin's situation," she said smoothly. "Family issue. Complicated. You don't need to worry about it." Bryce was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that made her pause. "I had a doctor come tonight." Her expression didn't change. "For what?" she asked lightly. "For a DNA test," Bryce said. The silence between them shifted. Just slightly. Tanya's fingers tightened around her clutch. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Bryce held her gaze. "Because if those children are part of this family," he said quietly, "then they deserve protection." For the first time that night, Tanya didn't answer immediately. Her eyes searched his face. Measuring. Calculating. Then she forced a small smile. "Well," she said softly, "I guess we'll know the truth soon." Bryce nodded. "Yes," he said. "We will." But as Tanya turned to leave the study, her smile faded the moment her back was to him. And when she reached the hallway, she pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. Because for the first time since the night began, Tanya Whitfield was afraid the truth might come out before she could stop it. Tanya walked quickly down the hallway, her heels striking the marble a little harder than usual. She didn't stop until she reached Bryce's private study. Closing the door behind her, she locked it. For the first time that night, her breathing wasn't steady. A DNA test. Bryce had moved faster than she expected. Her hands tightened around her phone as she dialed a number from memory. The line rang twice. A woman's voice answered, low and cautious. "Yes." "I need you to listen carefully," Tanya said, her tone sharp and controlled. "There will be DNA samples arriving tonight from the Harrington account. I want them flagged." There was a short pause. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm asking for the results to show no family connection," Tanya said flatly. "Whatever the real results are, I don't care. The report needs to come back negative." Silence. Then the woman spoke carefully. "That kind of change costs extra." "You'll get triple," Tanya replied. "But it has to be clean. No mistakes." She ended the call without waiting for an answer. For a moment, she stood still in the quiet room. Then she walked to the wall behind Bryce's desk and slid a framed painting aside. A hidden safe blinked open after she entered the code. Inside were stacks of cash, documents, and a small silver handgun wrapped in black cloth. Tanya picked it up. Not with fear. With familiarity. She slipped it into her purse, closed the safe, and replaced the painting. When she turned toward the door, her expression was calm again. Whatever happened next, she was ready. Across the city, Melody lay awake on the hard bench. The lights in the holding area never fully dimmed. Time felt frozen, stretched into something heavy and endless. She had stopped asking for updates hours ago. No one was going to tell her anything. She rested her head against the wall and closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the babies again. The way one of them had wrapped tiny fingers around her sleeve. The way the other had stopped crying when she sang softly in the dark. She had never held children before. But in those hours inside the trunk, something had happened. They had trusted her. And she had promised them, over and over, that she wouldn't let anything happen to them. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I tried." From the desk nearby, the night officer watched her for a moment. Then he looked away. He had seen too many cases where poor people were blamed before anyone asked questions. And most of the time, no one came to help them. Back at the mansion, the party had finally ended. The last guests had left. The music was off. Only a few lights remained on, casting long shadows through the quiet rooms. Bryce stood alone in the kitchen. Martha had fallen asleep in a chair, one hand resting near the basket. The twins were sleeping peacefully now, their breathing soft and even. Bryce leaned against the counter, exhaustion finally settling into his bones. The house felt different without the noise. Too quiet. Too honest. His phone buzzed. Caldwell. Bryce answered immediately. "I've secured the samples," Caldwell said. "They're being processed overnight at a private lab. No outside access. No interference." Bryce closed his eyes briefly. "Good." There was a pause. "Bryce," Caldwell added carefully, "if the results come back the way you think, what are you going to do?" Bryce looked at the babies. At the tiny lives that had no idea how close they were to losing everything. "I protect them," he said simply. "And Tanya?" Bryce didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "If she's guilty," he said, "then she's not the woman I thought she was." He ended the call. From the doorway, Martha stirred awake. "Sir?" she asked softly. "It's all right," Bryce said. "Go get some rest." "I'll stay with them." Martha hesitated. Then she nodded and left the room. Bryce pulled a chair closer to the basket and sat down. One of the babies shifted slightly. He reached out, letting the tiny hand curl around his finger again. The grip was stronger this time. Alive. Trusting. Family. Bryce sat there through the night. In the holding cell, Melody didn't sleep at all. And in her locked study, Tanya lay awake too. But not from worry. She was planning. Morning came slowly. Gray light spread across the city. At the precinct, Melody stood in line for breakfast she couldn't eat. Her hands were shaking too much. Every sound made her look up. Every time a door opened, her heart jumped. Then, suddenly, a guard called her name. Reeves. She stepped forward quickly. Yes. You're being released, he said. She blinked. What? Someone posted bail, he repeated. Melody stared at him. For a moment, her mind refused to understand. No one knows I'm here, she whispered. The guard just shrugged. Then somebody found out. Her legs felt weak as she signed the paperwork. The final door opened. Morning sunlight hit her eyes. And there, parked at the curb, was a black Rolls-Royce. Bryce leaned against the driver's door, sleeves rolled up, his expression tired but steady. When he saw her step outside, he straightened. Melody stopped walking. She didn't move. She just stared at him. Because in that moment, she didn't see a powerful man. She saw the only person who might have believed her. Bryce opened the passenger door. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. Are the babies safe? She asked. Bryce nodded once. They're waiting for you. The words broke something inside her. She climbed into the car, her hands shaking. As Bryce drove away from the precinct, neither of them spoke. But the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything that still needed to be said. And across town, in the quiet mansion, Tanya stood at the window, watching her phone. Waiting. Because the lab results were supposed to arrive that morning. And she was certain they would say exactly what she paid for. But what Tanya didn't know yet was that the report she was waiting for would never reach her first. The drive was quiet. New York moved around them like any other morning. Traffic building, people rushing, coffee shops opening. But inside the Rolls-Royce, time felt slower. Melody sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes were still swollen from a night without sleep, but she kept looking straight ahead, as if she was afraid that if she spoke, something fragile might break. Bryce kept his eyes on the road. He didn't ask questions. Didn't push. After everything she had been through, silence felt kinder than curiosity. When the car finally pulled into the mansion driveway, Melody's breath caught. The house looked the same. Perfect. Quiet. Beautiful. But to her, it didn't feel like the same place anymore. It felt like the center of a storm. Bryce stepped out first and walked around to open her door. They're inside, he said gently. Melody didn't wait. She moved quickly toward the kitchen, her steps uneven, her heart racing so hard she could hear it. When she pushed the door open, she stopped. Martha stood by the table, warming a bottle. And beside her, in the same wicker basket, the twins were awake. One of them made a soft sound. The other waved tiny arms in the air. For a second, Melody just stood there. Then she rushed forward and dropped to her knees beside the basket. I'm here, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm here, babies. She touched their faces carefully, as if afraid they might disappear. One of them turned toward her voice. The tiny fingers reached. That was all it took. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gathered them gently, holding them close, pressing her face against their soft blankets. Martha wiped her own eyes quietly and turned away. Bryce stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak. He just watched. And in that moment, He understood something that money and power had never taught him. Love didn't come from blood alone. It came from showing up. From protecting someone when you didn't have to. After a while, Melody looked up, her voice still trembling. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me." Bryce stepped inside. "I read Keith's letter," he replied. Her expression changed. "You know everything?" "Yes." She lowered her eyes. "I didn't know what else to do," she said quietly. "I heard Miss Tanya talking on the phone yesterday. She said someone was coming for the babies. I tried to call you, but you were in meetings. I didn't trust anyone else." Bryce nodded. "You did the right thing." She looked at him again, surprised. "I hid in the trunk because it was the only place I thought she wouldn't check," Melody continued. "I was scared they'd stop crying. I was scared they wouldn't." Her voice shook. "I kept telling them to stay quiet, to stay alive." Bryce didn't say anything for a moment. Then he spoke, his tone calm but firm. "You saved them." Those 3 words settled heavily in the room. For the first time since the nightmare began, Melody's shoulders relaxed slightly. Just a little. Bryce's phone buzzed. He stepped aside to answer. Caldwell's voice came through immediately. "The results are in." Bryce's grip tightened around the phone. "And?" There was a brief pause. Then Caldwell spoke clearly. "Confirmed. 99.9% match. The twins are Keith's children." Bryce closed his eyes. Relief came first. Then grief. Then something deeper. Family. "They're Harrington blood," Caldwell added. "The official report is already secured." "Good," Bryce said quietly. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, steadying himself. When he returned to the kitchen, Melody looked up anxiously. "What did they say?" she asked. Bryce met her eyes. "They're his," he said. Her breath caught. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time there was relief in them. "I knew it," she whispered. "They have his eyes." Bryce nodded slowly. "Yes, they do." From the hallway, a soft sound of heels approached. Both of them turned. Tanya stood in the doorway. Her expression was calm, controlled, but her eyes moved quickly, to the babies, to Melody, to Bryce. "I was wondering where you two disappeared to," she said lightly. "I heard Melody was released." Melody instinctively tightened her hold on the twins. Bryce stepped slightly closer to her without thinking. A small movement. But Tanya noticed. Her smile thinned just a little. "I'm glad everything worked out," she continued. "Now we can send the babies back to their family and put this whole situation behind us." Bryce didn't answer. He just looked at her. "Tanya," he said finally, his voice quiet, "the DNA results came in." Her eyes flickered. "Oh?" she said carefully. "That was fast. They're Keith's children." The silence that followed felt heavy. Tanya's face didn't change immediately, but her fingers tightened around her purse. "That's unexpected," she said slowly. Bryce watched her. "Is it?" For the first time, her eyes met his directly. There was something sharp there now. Something defensive. "Well," she said, her tone cooling, "if they're family, then we'll handle it properly. Lawyers, guardianship, arrangements. These things need to be controlled." Melody looked down at the babies, her arms tightening protectively. Bryce noticed, and something in him hardened. "We'll handle it," he said. Tanya studied his face carefully. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said. "We should talk later." She turned and walked away. But as she reached the hallway, her calm expression disappeared. Her hand moved quickly to her phone. Because the report she had paid to control had just confirmed the one thing she couldn't afford to be true. And if the children were officially Harrington heirs, then everything she had been working toward was suddenly at risk. Tanya walked quickly down the hallway, her voice low and sharp as she spoke into her phone. "Get me the lab. Now." But when the call connected, the answer she received wasn't the one she expected. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitfield," the technician said politely. "Those samples were redirected last night to a private facility under Mr. Harrington's legal authority. We didn't handle the case." For a moment, Tanya didn't breathe. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "you had no access to the results?" "That's correct." The line went dead. Tanya stood there in the quiet hallway, her hand trembling around the phone. For the first time since this began, she understood something dangerous. Bryce wasn't reacting emotionally. He was moving ahead of her, planning, protecting, and that meant she was losing control. By afternoon, the mansion no longer felt like her territory. Lawyers arrived. Documents were prepared. Temporary guardianship for the twins was filed under Bryce's authority. Every step was legal. Every step was clean. Every step closed another door around her. When Tanya finally walked into Bryce's office, she didn't bother pretending anymore. "You're moving very fast," she said. Bryce looked up calmly. "They're family," he replied. "Family doesn't wait." Her eyes narrowed. "And where exactly does that leave me?" Bryce leaned back slowly. "That depends," he said. "Did you know about Keith's children?" The silence stretched between them. Tanya crossed her arms. "I knew he was seeing someone beneath him," she said coldly. "I didn't think it would matter." "Beneath him?" Bryce repeated. She shrugged. "A waitress. No money. No name. If people like that start claiming Harrington blood, then what happens to the company? The reputation? The future?" Bryce watched her carefully. "And ordering someone to take the babies," he asked quietly, "was that about protecting the company too?" Her eyes flashed. "I was protecting what's mine." The words hung in the air. "Not ours. Mine." That was the moment Bryce understood something clearly. Tanya had never loved him. She loved the life around him. And anything that threatened that life had to be removed. "I spoke to Benny," Bryce said calmly. The color drained from her face. "And the police?" she asked. "They have his statement." For the first time, real fear showed. "You wouldn't do that to me," she whispered. Bryce stood slowly. "You already did it to yourself." The engagement ended that day. The investigation moved quickly after that. Attempted child endangerment. Conspiracy. Financial coercion tied to Keith's death. For someone who had always believed money could fix everything, the courtroom felt like a world where wealth didn't speak as loudly. Justice came quietly. But it came. Weeks later, the mansion felt different. Quieter. Warmer. Less like a display. More like a home. The twins had grown stronger. Their cries were louder now, their eyes brighter. And Melody was almost always nearby. Not because anyone asked her to be. Because she chose to be. One evening, Bryce found her in the garden, sitting on a bench with both babies sleeping against her shoulders. The sun was setting, soft light falling across the lawn. "You don't have to do everything yourself," Bryce said gently. Melody smiled. "I know." He sat beside her. "You saved them," he said. "You saved my brother's family. You saved mine." She shook her head. "I just did what anyone should do." Bryce looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "Most people don't risk everything for someone else." She didn't answer right away. Then she spoke softly. "I grew up with nothing. When you don't have money, you learn something early." "What's that?" he asked. "That the only thing you really own is your heart," she said. "If you lose that, you lose everything." Bryce looked at the sleeping babies, then back at her. For the first time in years, his voice carried something softer than power. "You don't work here anymore," he said. Melody blinked. "I'm sorry. Your family now," he continued. "They're guardian with me. Equal authority. Equal protection." Her eyes filled slowly. "I'm not educated enough for that world," she whispered. Bryce shook his head. "You're exactly what that world needs." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from fear. Not from pain. From something she had never expected to feel in a place like this. Belonging. Months passed. The house filled with laughter instead of tension. Martha baked again. Music played sometimes. The garden grew brighter. And Bryce changed too. He worked less at night. He came home earlier. Because there were two small reasons waiting for him. And one woman who reminded him, every day, that strength wasn't about control. It was about care. One quiet evening, as he held one of the twins in his arms, Melody watched him from across the room. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "What?" Bryce asked. "You opened that trunk expecting champagne." He smiled faintly. "And instead," she looked at the child in his arms. "Instead, you opened your heart." Bryce looked down at the baby, then back at her. And in that quiet moment, one truth settled deeper than any business deal, any contract, any fortune. The night he thought his life was being ruined was the night it was finally given meaning. Because wealth can build a house. Power can build an empire. But only love, kindness, and courage can build a family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. And tell us in the comments, which country or region are you watching from?